Hi, this is Yusri and Ismail from the RunCloud show, where we talk to PHP programmers from around the world. And today we have here with us Chris Hartjes. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes, you did. Absolutely correct. It's a tough last name, so I'm kind of used to people stumbling over it.
All right, so it's okay. You can call me Dino if that is a lot easier for you.
Well, yeah, no, Dino is fine. I mean, where I grew up is in Canada is like one of the most multicultural places on the planet. So I got used to from a very young age hearing all sorts of accents and hard to pronounce names. So, but yeah, we'll go with Dino just to make it easy.
All right, so you are calling in from Canada.
Yes, I live near Toronto, Canada. I'm like in a fourth ring suburb, which is like pretty much as far west as you can go and be considered living in the greater Toronto area. But I've lived in and around Toronto my entire life.
Okay, first of all, I just would like to thank you for doing this with me, and I'm sure we can share a lot, and a lot can be learned from you for our listeners and our audience. And because this is a show for PHP programmers and about PHP programmers, I think the first thing what we'll do is maybe cover some really really simple stuff. I've never done one before, but I think it's going to be interesting to do. So I'm going to ask you some simple questions about you as a programmer. First of all,
Sure.
are you a desktop or a laptop person?
Laptop.
Laptop. So do you mind if I know what laptop you use?
Oh, I have one of the new Apple MacBook Pros with the touch bar on it. I got it at the beginning of this year, but I don't use the touch bar that much because normally I run my laptop closed and plugged into my employers bought me a very nice Dell 4K monitor, and I use a Bluetooth keyboard. So it's a laptop, but I kind of treat it like a desktop, I guess.
All right. And how about your phone? Is it an Android or an iPhone or a BlackBerry maybe?
I have an iPhone 6 Plus, nice big
Oh wow,
huge one right here.
nice.
Yeah.
And what do you use for programming, your text editor?
Most of the time I use Vim. I've been a long time Vim
Oh
user,
wow.
but on projects where things have gotten a little bit complicated and I can't keep everything in my head anymore, I've started using PHP Storm.
PHP Storm. All right. From JetBrains. All right, that's nice.
Hmm.
And lastly, do you use Git for version control?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We use Git both for my personal projects and where I work. We use Git for everything.
So where do you host your Git? GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket?
GitHub.
Oh, all right. Okay, I just want to point out there's no right and wrong answer. It's all about personal preference. So, okay, let's talk about you now. Um, what we do with the guests on the show is that we ask them about how they got started with PHP and where they go from there. So, do you mind? Um, of course, now you're known for your books, the Grumpy Learning and the Grumpy Programmer series. So, but before that and before PHP, what were you doing and how you got started with PHP?
Well, the way I got started with PHP was way back in 1998. I was working, I was just out of college, and I was working for a place that sold, I mean, this shows you how long ago this is, that was selling um, compilation CDs for professional DJs, because in Canada, DJs needed to have licenses to play the music in the club. So this company would compile all the music, and sell a bunch of CDs. So initially, I started off just doing basically like I was the in-house IT person, so helping people with their computers and all that stuff. And when I was in college, I had done a tiny bit of Perl, and there came a time when my boss wanted a website, and he didn't want to pay for what was back then a lot of money for a Microsoft IIS license. So he's like, well, go find me something that's free. So I just started searching, and I found this thing, PHP, and I'm like, okay, I wasn't the hugest Perl fan, but when I looked, I'm like, oh, this looks kind of like Perl. I can probably figure out how this works. I've been computer programming for like a super long time. When I was a kid, my uncle bought our family a Commodore VIC-20. So this is in 1983, 84, something like that.
Wow.
I taught myself how to program in BASIC. So
Mm-hmm.
having a computer around and programming with it was just like a normal thing that I did. So discovered PHP, discovered MySQL, built out the really terrible looking website for the company that allowed people to search an online database to find out if they had a song that we sold. So, and it just went onwards from that.
Chris, you said you knew Perl, but why didn't you build it in Perl?
Because I didn't know how was the big thing. We had done some command line stuff with Perl, but you have to kind of remember when I was in college in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the commercial internet really hadn't picked up. It wasn't until my last year at school that we even had a graphical browser, and we weren't. I mean, Netscape was either the first version of Netscape Navigator either hadn't come out yet or was in beta or something. So I would surf the web in text, and I had no idea how you would build a website. I had no idea how it worked, and at the time I didn't even really care how it worked.
Right.
So we never did any web stuff. So I was just looking for something web specific. And in 1998, if you wanted a tool that was super easy to build websites, it was either PHP or you're using the old classic ASP stuff. So it's just total random chance that I discovered PHP, and that's kind of how life works.
Right.
Random stuff ends up being things that define your career.
Oh, all right. Yeah, interesting. I remember I asked because my random stuff happened to be Perl, because you built a website and then you started to want to store information, store data, and have it a little bit more interactive. I discovered CGI, and you had to do that mostly in Perl. Yes. So I think my random stuff was Perl when I got started with the web and interactive web. Yeah. But anyway, so what have you been doing after that?
Well, I mean, I bounce around from place to place. I'm the type of person who, for a super long time, has always approached jobs as opportunity to learn things. And then when I get bored, I move on and go work someplace else. So from there, I just started from just working at different places in and around the Toronto area. And then maybe like about 10 years ago, I started working for places remotely. So I'm very lucky that, I've spent a very long time working from the comfort of my own home. Right now I'm down in the basement of my house, and we had an office built down here a number of years ago. So it's nice and comfy, and, I get the chair that I want and the desk that I want, and my employers continue to, in exchange for me doing stuff for them, they continue to let me work from home. I've worked for places of all different sizes, from like little tiny companies like that one, the one where I first learned PHP, to I worked for a team building websites for super big US cable companies, and now these days I work for Mozilla. I don't do any PHP at Mozilla, but I mean, I'm helping test services that Firefox uses all the time, so millions and millions of people are using the stuff that I tested. So I feel like in my almost 20 years of doing this stuff, I've seen pretty much everything.
All right, so you said you don't do PHP with Mozilla. So what else do you do that is not PHP?
Well, I mean, just at the day job. So I work for Firefox test engineering. So we're the part of Mozilla that's making sure that Firefox and all the associated services work correctly. And so I work for the part of the team where we test services. So my days are spent writing tests in Python. Normally, we use PyTest a lot. So I write a lot of functional tests and a lot of API contract tests, and just every time there's a deployment of a service, a bunch of tests that I wrote get run, and we just verify that everything's working okay. So it's a lot of time, talking to the developers about the features that they're doing, talking to them about, can we build some hooks into this API so I can find out the version number, and figuring out ways to automate a lot of things that people in the past were doing manually. So I would say, it's like 50% automation and 50% just figuring out how to test a service in such a way that we have a really high level of confidence when we flip the switch to deploy something to production that everything's going to work okay, and people won't yell at us too much.
All right. I was with Ed Finkler recently. I had this same show, and I was told, and I understand now, that you have a show with him previously, a podcast.
Yep.
So,
we've been doing that since December 2012, I think we started. Yeah.
Wow, that's a long time. So what is that about?
Yeah, so it just started off where Ed and I knew each other for a little bit before then. We had run into each other at PHP conferences. And so just one day on Twitter, he was talking about how he thought it might be cool to do a podcast. And I said to him, yeah, I'd be interested in doing that with you. So just the idea, he had this domain name kicking around that he had been using called DevHell, so short for development hell. So just the idea around the podcast would just be two older cranky programmers just talking about programming stuff and anything else that comes up. And it just started off as, we're just and we still kind of do that, where we just we talk about whatever we want to talk about, and we hope that other people find what we're doing to be interesting.
Ah, nice. So it's at devhell.com.
Devhell.info. I know, dumb domain name, but
info.
Yeah.
Right. Good to know. Now I've read a little bit about on your website, right, about Grumpy Learning. So how did Grumpy Learning started out?
Well, that started out when I decided I wanted to make a little bit more money on the side, and I was like, I have to find a way. There's got to be a way to turn all this stuff I've been doing about blog posts and conferences and stuff and make a little bit of money. So I decided, okay, I want to write some books. I have a longtime friend of mine online, Amy Hoy, who's done a lot of really good work surrounding product development, like how you go about researching your ideas and making sure that this little side project you're going to spend a significant amount of time on is going to work from the beginning, and people are going to want to give you money for it. So I was like, okay, I kind of need a brand to wrap everything in. And so, my wife would complain how much work made me grumpy all the time about stuff. So I thought, I think the idea of the grumpy programmer brand is idea of a grumpy old programmer telling you what to do. It seemed like something that would probably work and be a good identity to latch on, because there's lots of opportunities for humor and stuff with a brand like that. And so, I changed my Twitter handle from where it used to be C Hartjes when I first started, and went Grumpy Programmer. And of course, right from the beginning, I got to be grumpy because I found out that Twitter had a limit on the number of characters. So I got to be Grumpy Programmer without the U. So right from the beginning, there was going to be trouble. So it just became just a brand and a company to wrap all my efforts around it, and just to sort of keep that separate from, an attempt to keep it separate from the day job, and just so that everything had a theme, and I could craft marketing messages around it and have an actual company behind everything. So it's one of these things where, I talked about earlier about how he kind of discovered PHP randomly. And the idea of this brand of the Grumpy Programmer and the marketing surrounding it has succeeded way beyond what I ever thought it would be. So again, it's kind of nice that you just do something, off the cuff, and it works way, way better than I ever thought it would.
Oh, wow. So how is it doing really so far? How many copies?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to go look at my sales, but I've been pretty transparent about it. I think lifetime, I'd have to look it up, but I don't want to delay the recording to do that. But well, because I'd have to go look at all my sales numbers.
No. Yeah, it's okay.
I would say, I'd probably say for the first couple of years, it brought in between 15 and 20,000 US a year just for side stuff. And it's slowed down a little bit as I mean, just to be honest, as I've gotten tired, I've been doing so much stuff, and the travel for conferences and things I want to do in my in my private life, they start to take a little bit bigger priority. So things have slowed down a little bit, but it's for there was a couple of years there where it was a good 20 to 25% of my income, which is really nice. And I worked really hard to put all this stuff together, so it was nice to kind of sit back and let the money come in. And I mean, I'm still doing stuff. I have a new book that's about to come out. I'm literally just waiting for the cover art to come back from the artist. So it's helped me build a much different career than I think I would have had if I hadn't done it. It's opened up a lot of opportunities, speak at conferences, and just one of the hardest things for a programmer to do is to have an easy way to prove that you know what you're doing, and that you know what you're talking about, and that you're reliable and worth the money that you're asking people to pay you. And the Grumpy Learning stuff has definitely been that vehicle. I've gotten so many opportunities to do things because of a decision, like 4 or 5 years ago, to write a book and come up with a funny character to build everything around. So I mean, it's been successful, and it's still going, and it just the money that comes in from it goes up and down, literally depending on how much work I feel like putting into it. There's some months where I do a whole bunch of stuff, and there's other months where it just sits there, and I do very little and just rely on a handful of book sales here and there.
All right. So, okay, your book and the whole thing about the Grumpy Programmer, the way I see it, it's the main topic that you're pushing is the testing, the unit testing. So why is that? Any specific reason why you chose that?
Yeah, well, I mean, many years ago, I worked for a company that was building a dating website. Unfortunately, not one of the nicer ones. One of the ones where designed for like businessmen to cheat on their wives. So not my proudest moment. But so what happened is that it was a very typical PHP application of that time. Spaghetti logic and database calls mixed in with your HTML. I mean, the frameworks didn't even really exist back then. That's how long ago this was. So we had a terrible launch, and we had a terrible death march leading up to it, where like in 6 weeks leading up to Christmas, I worked like 100+ hours of overtime just so the team could get everything done. So when it was all done, I was like, man, I don't ever want to go through that again for any reason. I don't care what it is. So during a talk with the person who was the project manager, we were just talking about this stuff and planning what we're going to do, because there's a whole bunch of other follow-up stuff we had to do, a bunch of bugs we had to fix and stuff. And so we like slid a book across the desk to me and said, hey, Chris, I think you should take this book home over the weekend and take a look at it. So it was, I think it was Extreme Programming in Practice. So one of the first extreme programming agile books out there. And so I took it home, and at this time I was still working in an office. So I had a very long commute back and forth. It used to be 90 minutes for me to get to work and 2 hours to get home because of the train schedules. Yeah, so it was pretty long. And my kids were really little. I have 2 girls. They were really little at the time, so I wasn't getting to see them much. So I was mad about that too, with all that overtime and never getting to see them. And so they had a section on unit testing, and specifically this was at a time when they had created NUnit, which was like unit testing standard for Java, and that's PHP unit is built on those ideas. The idea is that we're writing these small little tests, and we have assertions, and the whole backbone is we're creating a scenario, and then we're exercising our code, and then we're making an assertion that the result is what we're expecting. So I saw that, and it was like that old the cartoon with the light bulb over top of the head going on, bing. It's like, oh my God, you mean there was a way that we could have written a whole bunch of code to verify that all this stuff was working before we turned our customers into our QA department? So after reading that, I was like, no, this is the thing that I want to do. I believe this sort of practice has a ton of value. And so for the longest time, I mean, I've been going on the PHP conference circuit for almost 10 years now. And for the longest time, I was the only person talking about testing, yelling at people to test their stuff and convincing them of the value of it. So, it's been for the longest time, I was literally the only person telling people, this is something you should be doing, and here's the reason why. And so it's very, very nice to see other people have taken up the same cause, and it's no longer just one random Canadian guy trying to get to as many conferences as I could to spread the news that testing is good and testing is easy and testing is something we can all do. So it was just literally because work sucked so bad for that project. I was like, I don't ever want to go through this again. And there has to be something out there to help make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again.
Okay, let's say for people who are new to testing, I mean, of course, people who learn programming and then they learn PHP and start building a website, testing is like something they don't really think about, right? So what are the benefits? If, let's say for the new people or those who just got started with PHP, what are the benefits of testing?
Well, so I mean, I think if you look at it in terms of the benefits that you're getting, there's a couple things, and I mean, I do super long talks about this stuff, so I'll try to condense it down into a shorter version. So the way that I use testing, the way that a lot of people use testing, is with test-driven development. So it's the idea that you're using tests to design your application, to design all the interfaces, to design your objects and your methods, and so basically your test consists of, you sit down and you say, okay, how do I want this particular bit of code to work? You write a test as if everything is working the way that you expect, and then you run the test, and of course the test fails because you haven't written any other code yet, and then you just keep writing code until the test passes, and then you move on to the next test, and the next test, and the next test. So an application that you are driving its design with tests, you end up with a whole bunch of small modules that do very specific things, and then you're creating an application by literally snapping all of them together like Lego blocks, is the kind of the analogy that I use. But, if you go away from that little cute description of it, what the tests are doing is you're providing clarity into how the code is supposed to work. You're verifying that everything's working the way that you expect it to. You're also making it easier in the future to extend the code because you have a whole bunch of tests that can tell you if I modify or refactor something, did I break a different part of the application. And it also helps provide documentation on how things are supposed to work. There have been many times where I've gone to use like a third-party library, and the documentation is terrible. I mean, this is pretty much standard, but they have tests. So at least I can go look at the tests and figure out how to use this thing. So it's the idea that you're writing these tests to give yourself confidence so that when you push everything up into production, stuff's not going to break, because there's this people, a lot of people don't understand there's this concept of like of opportunity cost and hidden cost in programming. And if you've ever run a development team and you've ever seen how much it costs to pay developers, because most of us are not cheap, so you want to move all the times when you're trying to fix these bugs and repairing them to the cheapest part of the process, which is when the developer is in front of their computer with their editor open working on something. The further along the chain that a bug goes, the more and more expensive it is to fix it, right? You start out with just one developer. Then if you're lucky enough to have a process where someone reviews your code, if a bug is found at the review time, well, now you've had this extra cost of this other person's time. You have to go back and fix it and then go back to the reviewer. If it makes it through that, then maybe it goes up to staging. And if you have a QA person like me, maybe the QA person finds a bug, so now you got to go back and fix that bug. And then the reviewer has to go look at it. And then the QA person has to go find it. Then maybe you have like a pre-production environment. You go there. Someone finds the bug slips through there. Then you got to go back. The developer's got to fix it. Reviewers got to check it again. QA person's got to check it again. Person who tests pre-prod. Then if it makes it into production, well, who knows how expensive that bug could be to fix. Some bugs are trivial. Some bugs destroy companies, right? So there's this hidden cost, and until you've actually watched that all in action and seen what happens, the difference between a programming environment where people are required to write tests and no code moves forward until everything passes, there's a huge difference, and it creates a much different flow where your developers have confidence that all these changes are going to work, and you push it to production, and you can go on and do the next thing that's going to provide value to the business instead of spending all this time just fixing bugs and putting out fires and everyone's working late, and then deployments become scary and lots of distrust between the systems people and the developers and the managers yelling at you, why all these bugs keep happening? So it's more than just a technical thing. It's really a people thing, you know. It's managing people and managing their expectations and just making people understand the simple task of formalizing what you're going to do, and you write a test to ensure that everything's working the way that you want, will save you so much headache at the other end. So, I mean, that's what I tell people. You want to write bugs because you want to write tests, so you make sure your code has as few bugs as possible and that your code is behaving the way that you expect. Nobody writes perfect code. Bugs exist no matter how hard we try to avoid them. The goal is to use the tests to keep the bugs to a minimum, because stuff still slips through. Tests are written by people. People have their own weird assumptions about how stuff is supposed to work, and things still get missed. Even me, Mr. Expert Tester, still writes code with bugs in it, because it just happens. Because you just sometimes you can't think of everything. But the goal isn't to think of everything. It's just you're trying to protect yourself. I always tell people, future you will thank you for writing the test that you wrote today.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits that I can really see that really makes sense to me is that you think about it at least to minimize the how many times you have to think about it, right? Like that bug, if you write some test codes and it does capture some bugs, you're gonna fix it and that's done, and the next time it happens, the test code is gonna catch it, and you know, it's otherwise you would have to kind of like dig it up again and see the code again and where things are. And I think one of the other things that really kicks into me is like avoiding regression. I think that's the word, is it?
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, a big part of the bugs is to avoid regression. You know, like you talk about digging into things. I think what a lot of people don't actually realize is that most people actually do test what they're doing. They just don't do it in a formalized way. They're not creating. They're not using frameworks to create these tests. They're saving something. They're loading. They're refreshing their browser. They're clicking on things. They're going through a step. They're going through a predetermined series of steps, trying to make sure the bug goes away. So all I tell people is, look, you're spending this time testing your stuff. You might as well use some tools that are better suited to it. And the idea, I mean, computers are great at doing what we tell them over and over and over again. So why not use a framework and a set of tools that will allow you to tell the computer, hey, here's a test. Go run this thing for me and tell me if it passes. So again, you're not wasting mental energy worrying about this bug that I fixed a week ago. Did it actually fix the problem? It's like, no, you got proof right in front of you, whether it worked or not. So a lot of it's like trying to make it so that the everyday things you don't need to worry about. You can instead use your brain power to actually solve problems instead of constantly digging around in the same module of code and trying to remember, what did I do and why did I do this and why does this bug keep happening?
Yeah, I think one of the worst thing that can happen is that the bug happened, and you don't have formal testing and whatnot, and it keeps happening. You don't know, and the worst part, it may take a while before you realize that the bug was happening again. Because when you installed a new module or you made modifications to the code, you're not testing for earlier stuff that you did. And sometimes maybe a week goes by, some days goes by, a month goes by, and actually you have a bug that really bugs other people, the users, but you didn't realize about it until it was like a lot of people really complained.
Yeah, when I first got started doing all this testing stuff, the tools weren't good, and they were hard to use, and there was very little in the way of documentation. But if we look at things now in 2017, I mean, it's so easy to create a test suite because the tools themselves are really well defined. If we look on the PHP side of things, Phpunit is very well known. It's stable. There's tons and tons of documentation out there on how to use it. We now have really good continuous integration servers that are available to people, things like Jenkins and Travis and Circle CI. So it's gotten to the point where it's, the barrier to entry to get automated test system in place is super, super low. And that means that we're at a point where, it's really willful ignorance at this point to not having tests for your application, because all the tools are there. There's lots of support from people. I mean, like, again, it's not just me yelling at people on Twitter about testing stuff. It's like, no, there's millions and millions of web pages out there and thousands of people who have picked up the same cause and learned very similar skills to me and are out there to help you get stuff started. So in that respect, I've talked about this numerous times. There's no longer a viable excuse to not have some type of automated testing in place for your application. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do, but if you don't do it now at this point, it's because you've chosen not to, not because the techniques are hard or the tools are difficult to use. They're really not. There's just, I mean, I know I sound like a grumpy old man when I talk about this stuff, but you know, when I learned this stuff, I had to learn everything myself. There were so few people. There was like a handful of people in other programming communities who were doing similar things, but almost nobody in the PHP community was doing it. And so now it's like, yeah, if you write PHP and you want to have automated tests, there is no shortage of people who can step up and help you get a system like that in place.
Yeah, all right. So let's say somebody who's new, yeah, they can write good codes, good application, good software with PHP, but they haven't been exposed to testing, and they want to get started with testings. Where can they go? Grumpy programmer.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, I think, yeah. Well, first of all, my books are more for people who are like who learn well from reading and can learn well from taking a small example and then applying it to what they're doing. Because my two books there are the Grumpy Programmer's PHP Unit Cookbook, which is just a small book that says how to accomplish a specific task with PHP Unit, how do I use doubles, how to test doubles, how do assertions work, how do I set things up. And then my other book is called Minimum Viable Tests. And that's more like what I felt was the minimum amount of knowledge that you need to get into testing. So those are more for, like, I always tell people, if you're good at taking little snippets of people's stuff and adapting it, that's good. If you're a Laravel fan and you want to get into testing, my friend Adam Wathan, who lives like maybe an hour away from where I live, is a big guy in the Laravel community, and he's done an entire video series on doing test-driven development with Laravel, showing how he was building an application from scratch and just showing how to do the test-driven approach. Adam's like super good and focused on the task at hand. So, the thing about testing is like testing is really hard to learn on your own, just because the concepts are not normal programming ones. You're using a different framework. You're doing this idea of assertions and doubles to swap in for dependencies for your code. Those aren't normal programming techniques that PHP people are taught. I mean, nobody learns PHP using TDD from the beginning. Some other languages really encourage testing, but so it's one of these things you kind of stumble in on it. And then you have to find other people who've done it. I have yet to find someone that teaches themselves testing and gets to a really super high level without talking to other people and finding mentors who have done similar things. So I know it looks really scary and intimidating. I know it's because I've written books about it, looking at it like I couldn't believe when I sat down and wrote down, here's all the things you need to know just to get started testing your code. It's a lot of stuff. It can be really intimidating. So, stuff like my books are good. Adam's course is awesome. There's no shortage of like little small kind of introductory articles available on SitePoint and other places where you can find examples on how to get started. But in the end, I feel like the best thing you can do is like, find a mentor, find someone who's actually, you can get in touch with, who's done this sort of stuff and can kind of guide you through it. So many of the examples online are simplified, just because everybody's code is different and everybody's code is unique, and it's really hard to give generic testing advice on a person's specific code base, because everyone's code base is different. Some code bases are really easy to require extensive factoring just to get you to the point where you can start doing things like swapping out dependencies for databases and third-party API calls and stuff like that. So it's not easy. It's super rewarding once you figure it all out, and this nice, a nice security blanket around everything that you're doing. But it's really hard to get started on your own, which is why I always encourage people, do some research, find people in your area I mean, you look at us, we're like 12 hours apart, time zone wise. Find someone who's in like a close time zone to you, who you can talk to about this stuff. I've mentored people in the past. I haven't done a lot of it lately, but programming, there's no substitute for you sitting down with someone who has actually done this before and watching them go through the process of writing a test and explaining how they looked at your code and figured out what tests needed to be written to prove that everything was working. It's almost impossible to learn amongst programming techniques to learn testing by yourself. Given all my experience, I'm like, I can't imagine someone figuring out everything that I figured out on my own without help.
All right. Thank you for that. And I think talking about testing really gets you grumpy.
It's natural. I don't think you can be super happy about always going through and looking at people's code and figuring out what did they do and why did they do this and how am I going to write a test and do I need to change it? Do I need to change anything just to get the test to run? So I don't think there's too many happy testers out there.
I think it's not just your own code. Of course, sometimes you get frustrated and all mix of feelings when looking at other people's code. And I think you even get angry looking at your own code like 6 months ago or maybe last month or something like that.
No, for sure. I know, for the big open source project that I'm one of the lead devs for, OpenCFP, which is a project for conferences to collect papers, proposals to speak. That I've gotten lots and lots of contributions from people, and the test coverage sucks because I haven't devoted as much attention to it as I should have. But yeah, oftentimes I go back and look at code that I wrote and I'm like, why did I do that? Why did that's such a bad way to implement this stuff? And now look at all this extra work I have to do to test it. So yeah, I mean, the testing stuff really humbles you because it makes you realize how many assumptions you have about the way that you're doing things and how easy it is to take those shortcuts and just bang something out and get it done really, really quick without any considerations of the next person that has to come along and fix it, or whether even you can go back and fix it. Because I mean, the technical debt thing where you're taking a shortcut, you're deliberately doing something wrong because you need something to get done. And always when you go back, there's always regret and there's always anger and there's always all the other stuff that goes with it. And the test, at least the test though, it gives you a chance to kind of go back and examine what you do and now know, okay, even though this thing isn't the way that I wanted it, at least now I have a test wrapped around it so that if I have to go back and fix this now, I know the test will show me if I've broken stuff. I tend to be careful. I tend to be a very defensive. I write my code with a very defensive programming style. I try to assume the worst is going to happen. I try to protect myself from the me that knew a little bit less yesterday. So the testing stuff goes hand in hand with that. I think it encourages a coding style where your stuff is really easy to test.
All right, how about we talk about something else now? Let's talk about...
Sure. Anything but testing. I think I've talked enough about that.
So, what do you do outside of work?
So outside of work, probably my biggest... Well, I mean, if we set aside the grumpy learning thing, because I guess that is technically work. Because these days, So I work for Mozilla 4 days a week. So Monday through Thursday, I work for Mozilla, and then Fridays I do stuff for Grumpy Learning. That's when I work on my presentations and books and stuff. But outside of work, I'm a huge baseball fan, so I watch a lot of baseball. I play that ridiculously expensive collectible card game, Magic the Gathering.
Oh wow!
I've played that for a while. A long time ago, before I got involved in programming, I actually owned a store where we sold comic books and all those cards. So that's how I got into playing Magic. So yeah, Magic and, watch a lot of baseball. My life outside of work is pretty boring. I like to keep it stress-free and low-key. Dealing with stuff at work and testing and I do a lot of travel both for work and for conferences. So that the stress from that builds up pretty quick. So I try to keep the hobbies low-key.
Mm-hmm. Do you still collect comic books?
No, I really these days read the odd comic book with Comixology, which is like an app. Was a standalone company that was doing like digital comics, and then they got by Amazon.
Hmm.
Got bought by Amazon a couple of years ago. And a former coworker of mine works there, so I'm always forever hitting him up for suggestions on comic books to read.
All right.
I have the odd comic book. I don't have anything really super expensive. When I ran my comic book store, it didn't end well, so I just dumped most of the stuff that we have. I don't think we had anything really super valuable, but I got mad, right? I got mad that it didn't work, so you sell off everything at
All
super
right.
at super cheap prices just to get rid of everything. So yeah, but I used to read a lot more when I had a long commute, but working from home fixed a lot of that stuff, and
All right.
and just it's just been. I'll go back to an office full time when I'm dead. I never want to go back to working in an office full time. It's just I have everything. My whole entire home life is set up around me working from home, and it just at this point, it would just be so super disruptive for me to get on a train or get in my car and drive to an office every day. I'm very fortunate. Mozilla, we're about 1,300 employees with Mozilla, and about 40% of us are remote. So the
Oh,
company
wow.
is really set up. Yeah, the company's really set up to support remote people. In fact, the group that I work on, I'm here in just outside Toronto.
Hmm.
My former manager, who's now the manager of the whole group, he's like he lives like an hour west of me. We have somebody who's in Florida. One of the guys in our team works in London in the UK. We have a bunch of folks on the West Coast who work out of Mozilla's offices in Mountain View, California, which is right in the middle of Silicon Valley. Another guy's up in ski country in Colorado. So and the development teams that I work with, one team they're all clustered in Europe, in and around France. Another team that I'm on, a guy works in New York City somewhere, and then another guy's lives in Sweden, and then there's another person that's in Arizona somewhere. So everybody's all over the place. So I spend a lot of time in video chat like this,
Ah.
talking with team members and just figuring out stuff that we're going to do. Yeah, Mozilla has really gone all in on all the tools and support to make remote working very, very successful.
Okay, so let's say a company or maybe somebody who's looking to join a company that does remote working. How does it really work? I mean, what kind of tools they use? Is it all video conference, or do you have some other tools like to-do list or dashboard and whatnot?
Well, it really depends on the company. I mean, I'd say I think what really works for a successful remote company is that everybody uses the same set of tools to communicate. Doesn't really matter what you pick. Places I worked early on were remote. We chatted on IRC all the time, and we would do the odd Skype call if we had something that we couldn't figure out how to do via chat, because sometimes chat is okay, but it's very asynchronous, right? A lot of it's not real time, and sometimes we have stuff that we need to discuss and go over that is much better in person. I mean, you can see behind me I have a big whiteboard, so many times I just would aim my camera at the whiteboard and I would have a long chat with someone and diagram something out. I think the companies that have been successful with the remote work understand a couple of things. Number one is that everyone needs to use the same set of tools to communicate. So none of this thing where two people who happen to be in the same location just sit together physically and talk about stuff. No, everyone needs to see what they're talking about. So it requires a very, very high level of transparency. People should be discussing things in front of the group as much as possible. But also the big thing is understanding flexibility. The reason most people work remotely is because they have life circumstances that require them to stay. Most of the time it's because they have life requirements that make them want to work from home. For me, it was I didn't want to do that commute into Toronto anymore. So it's like, whatever it takes for me to work from home, I'm going to do that. For other people, it's because they have family and they can't move away, or other people like I just I bought a house and I can't. I just bought a house and I can't move. Or they want to work shift work. So like they want to work like instead of working the standard 9 to 5 job, they'll come in at noon and they'll be done at 9 p.m. at night. That sort of stuff. So everyone has reasons why they want to work remotely. Like I said, for me, it was family. I wasn't seeing my kids And the commute was just driving me nuts, especially in the wintertime. Trains would get canceled, trains would get rescheduled. So sometimes, there'd be big, long delays. The worst part was where I lived, the trains were only rush hour trains. So there was like 5 or 6 trains in the morning and 5 or 6 trains in the evening. And if I had to work late and I missed the last train, I would have to take a bus instead. And that could take 2.5 to 3 hours for me to get home as that bus wound its way through the same route that the train took, right? So, people work from home for a variety of reasons, but the key is everyone needs to use the same tools. These days at Mozilla, we have our own XMPP, so Jabber chat server that the entire company uses, and we have little channels for everybody. I'm probably signed into 6 or 7 different channels at once to monitor different projects. We do a lot of video chat. We have there's an application called Video with a Y, VIDYO, that Mozilla uses. That it's really good video conferencing software. Allows people to share their screens, and there's chat in there so people can cut and paste links in. But yeah, it's totally different when you're as opposed to when you're in the office, right? The communication has to be different. Everything's text based. You learn to communicate much more clearly in a shorter period of time, because I only can talk to this person via text, or this person is 6 hours ahead of me in terms of time zones. So when I'm at lunchtime, my coworker's done. So if I need to get stuff done, got to do it through email, got to do it through text. Be very clear and very accurate in the things that I want. I found working remotely really helped me get much better at communicating. And when I needed to communicate, to use, not the fewest words possible, but just how to get the ideas across very quickly. So there's far less back and forth, because it's very easy, we're doing here, to ramble back and forth and cover a whole bunch of different topics. But when it's work stuff, it's like you want to get that idea across and get the feedback as quickly as possible so that everybody can get their job done.
You're trying to think for the other person as well. Before they ask the question, you got that covered beforehand.
It's kind of what you're trying to do, but yeah, like Mozilla's, I've worked for a bunch of places. Some were really good at the remote stuff, and some were really, really bad. And to support remote people, it's work. It takes work, and it takes commitment to understand that just because the person is in the same room as you doesn't mean you should ignore them. It's very easy when you have a company where things are mixed, where some people are remote and some people are in office. It's very easy for the in-office people to forget that there's remote people working, because you don't actually physically see them. When I look at the channels that I'm in, I'm always astonished at the number of people who are actually signed into all the channels I'm in at Mozilla. With Mozilla, it's a little bit different, because a lot of what we do is in the open and available for the public to see. So I imagine a very large percentage of people who are in the channels that I hang out in are not actual Mozilla employees or contributors or people who are interested in what Mozilla is doing. But yeah, everything is all text-based. We document lots of what we work. All our Git repos, for the most part, are public. So when I write tests and stuff, people can literally just clone the repo and see what I've done. So that's a very different approach from other places that I worked. Everything that I do is out in the public for people to see.
All right, nice. I think we've covered a lot. I think we've come to the end of the show. I want to thank you for doing this with me. And,
well, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think it was fun. Maybe we'll catch up again later and do some other things and talk about other things that we probably can. So how about any last words for PHP programmers around the world?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, PHP had a bad reputation for a long, long time, and a lot of it was earned through, through poor practices at the coding level, the whole inconsistency in parameters. Is it needle, haystack? Is it haystack, needle? But these days, PHP is a rock-solid, object-oriented language that is fast and performant, and the barrier to entry to use it is really, really low. And as an experienced programmer, I want to tell people trashing other languages is not worth the effort. Pick tools that you like, ignore people that tell you that the tools are wrong and just keep building stuff. Your skills will level up, and the longer you go doing this stuff, you'll discover a lot of the things that you've learned programming PHP are transferable to other languages. There's no need to be ashamed of PHP anymore. PHP is a well-suited tool to building web apps. That's its sweet spot. Keep using it. Don't care. I don't care if people say they don't like PHP, because I'm going to keep using it because it's the tool I'm most comfortable using.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. I think personally, I do a lot of PHP. I use PHP for most of my stuff, but honestly, I don't really mind what people use when they build their software, when they build their web apps. I don't even mind if they use Pascal CGI, as long as yeah. I think for me, I want to see what they build, the outcome, the end results. For me, that's the most important thing. All right.
Pascal CGI. I've never seen Pascal CGI. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, actually, you can do that.
Wow. Well, I guess if people can put COBOL apps up on the web, I guess almost anything is possible.
All right. This has been fun. Thank you very much, Chris. Maybe we'll talk again.
Thanks, Dino.
All right.
Yep, sounds good. Bye.